Hello, everyone, and welcome back to our podcast, The War Room, which is our interview series as part of the Clone Star Pod. I am your host, Sean Ferrick, and joining me is one of the preeminent linguists, certainly in Star Trek, but also in his field. He's written a doctoral thesis on the Klingon language. He was a teacher and fellow of the Smithsonian, and also created just about every language you can think of from the main races in Star Trek. Dr. Marc Okrand, it's an absolute honor. How are you, sir?
I'm great. Thank you. It's great to be here.
It's just this is really, really special because, full disclosure, we've recently just done a couple of breakdown videos on particularly the motion picture and the Wrath of Khan. So the Wrath of Khan. And so I've heard your name a lot over the last while. So this is really exciting for me. But this is so cool.
Good. This is cool for me too.
So I mean, the first question I'm going to ask is, how's your 2023 going for you?
2023 so far is terrific. Yeah, it's very nice. Much better than the last few years. So far, so good.
Good. All right, you'll tip wood. It'll stay that way. That's fine. And are you still creating languages left, right, and center? I mean, like looking at your bibliography of languages, it seems like, oh, it's Tuesday, I'll write another language.
No, it's very much slowed down. It's very much slowed down from a bunch of years ago. It hasn't gone away. Primarily, my biggest output, I suppose, is Klingon, but it's not so much for the TV shows. There's 5 of them. It's not so much for them as it is for the speakers of Klingon, around the world. So that keeps going. And every once in a while, I get a strange email or a phone call from somebody that needs something, but not anywhere near as much as before.
Do you have many people who will reach out to you in pure Klingon?
Occasionally at a convention, someone will come up and say something. And occasionally at the end of an email, someone will sign off in Klingon or something like that.
So I certainly understand the temptation. Full disclosure, I know Kapla, and words like that. So I struggle with languages anyway. I say that as I only speak English, and I've lived in Ireland my entire life. So
I say the same thing. I only speak English, and I've lived in America my entire life. So
Okay, so only speaking English and living in America your entire life. This is probably a question you get asked all the time. What interests you about language? Like, what brought you to the study of linguistics?
What brought me to the study of linguistics was a class I had in college, which I think I went to college was a brand new campus. I was there the second year of its existence. And I think the faculty of this course that everybody had to take through the course together the weekend before the students showed up. And that could have been a disaster, but it turned out to be really good because what it was, I don't know what it was intended to be, but what it was an introduction to the faculty and an introduction to various disciplines. So there was a common theme of language in it. But one week it was taught by a professor of linguistics, but another week it would be a professor of history, and another week philosophy, and another week psychology, and so on. So we learned all these different ways of looking at language. And the one that intrigued me the most was when the linguistics professor was talking. So I started taking courses in that, and after the first year and a couple of courses, summer came back after this summer, and they'd already revamped the entire program in this school that was brand new. And the course I was supposed to take next didn't exist anymore because they combined it with something else. So they set me up with just me and the professor one-on-one, which is very unusual for a second-year college student. And instead of just doing classwork, exercises and so forth, he gave me some real language data to work on, and then I was hooked. Okay, and then it was really fun to figure all this stuff out. And what I liked about it was partly the whole getting to know new cultures and history and all that kind of thing, but looking at the language structure itself, the grammar and the sounds and all that. It was, and I don't mean to make this sound trivial, but it was like a great crossword puzzle. How does this all fit together? No one knows how this works. No one knows where it came from. Let's figure it out. And that's what it was.
I love that, though, because there is, language, like any discipline, like for example, maths or music. If it doesn't work together properly, it sort of falls apart, doesn't it?
Right. Yeah. And language is the same way, except language has all kinds of, it works like this, except,
Yes. I know this is such a base example, but I before E, except after C, asterisk.
Right. And actually, it's seldom I before E except after C if you look at all the words. Yeah.
So was there a particular attraction to, you've obviously done so much study in the field of Native American languages. Was that it's just the one that grabs your attention, or was there, say, was your professor, was that their specialty as well?
Exactly. The data that he gave me was from American Indian language, specifically from around the area where my college was. So it was very, very local. And at the time, and the language I ended up writing my dissertation about is a related language to those. So it's all from that general area, which is sort of around San Francisco. And at the time, there was 0 speakers of those languages. Okay, the last speaker of any of them, last fluent speaker, died in around 1930. And so all of my research was based on notes that an anthropologist had written down, or missionaries had written down, or something like that. So it was this great mystery game, hunting for clues, but I couldn't sit down with somebody and say, okay, how do you say this? How do you say that? Oh, wait a minute. I'm understanding this right. What about that? I couldn't do that. So if I'm looking at the notes, and this guy, the main guy who compiled the notes I looked at, was very, he liked to use a lot of paper, not write very much on any sheet sometimes. So lots of sheets of paper. And I'd look on one and it would say, like he walks. Okay. I walk. You walk. Great. I'm getting somewhere. I'm learning how to do this. The sea is green. Wait, what happened to they walk? What happened to we walk? And I had no control over that. So it was great. It was a great mystery adventure. Yeah.
I mean, I've been a history student for years, right? So I love the story of how things come together, why things are the way they are. And a lot of the times I'm happily spoiled by it. It's there. It's the history books are there. It's there. It sounds like you're stuck with this. It's a puzzle, and you have the pieces, but you don't necessarily have the picture. Then you have to see how they fit together.
Yeah, I don't know how it's going to work out. Ultimately, I can have clues, but as soon as you turn the page, oh well, that was wrong. Let's think of something else. Yeah. And lots of holes. When I worked on my dissertation, in particular, there was a I don't know, 2 or 3 or 4 cardboard boxes filled with these notes that I had access to. The guy who compiled these notes, in addition to the missionary stuff and some older work, the guy who compiled these notes worked for the Smithsonian, in the Smithsonian Institution, and after he died, most of his notes ended up in Washington.
Okay.
I was at the time in California. This was in Berkeley. A couple of boxes ended up in Berkeley, and those are the notes that I looked at. I knew there was more, but I didn't have access to it at the time. That's a bad thing for research purposes. That's a great thing for dissertation writing purposes. Oh, because really? I knew when I was done. There's nothing else to look at. Okay. So I have to finish with what I've got. I could proceed afterwards and do more work. But in terms of getting that particular task done, this was great.
I'm now just imagining a situation where, one day it's coming up to the deadline. You have everything all proofread, everything. You get a phone call. They're like, oh, actually, we can get another box to you. No.
Right. No, I don't want
to. You have reached the answering machine of. Yeah. That is fascinating because, of course, this is before, you need something. Let me just send you an attachment. I mean, there is a lot of work.
This is before anything. This is before any of that kind of technology. Yeah, all the work I did was on little cards, right? All kinds of information, little cards, and shuffle the cards and things like that.
It is like one of the I remember. I vividly remember. So in the 90s, so this probably would have been the revised edition of your Klingon dictionary. Well, there was the Star Trek monthly magazine was released, and of course I had, at this point, for my pocket money, can I have that, please? And we get the Klingon dictionary with this, and I remember going, this is so cool. I'm going, oh, it's an actual dictionary. But it was, everyone was getting a copy of it. It was great that here I was in Ireland and we had access to a copy of it. And but it's, there's not like a go on Amazon and order it back then. It was, I'm basically just saying I had a copy of your book when I was really young and I really liked it. Thank you very much. Yeah. How did I presume obviously these things lead one into the other? So how did your your thesis work and your work with Native American languages lead you into the closed captioning career?
In kind of a sideways way.
Okay.
Because I finished up the thesis. I was teaching linguistics at another campus of the University of California in Santa Barbara. And then I got a fellowship at the Smithsonian in Washington to get to those boxes.
I was going to say, was that one of the draws there?
And so on, right? And while I was there, I was also looking for a job because the thing at the Smithsonian was only going to last for a year.
Gotcha.
And the Santa Barbara job was a temporary job, so I couldn't count on that long term. And I ended up not getting a job teaching linguistics again, but I ended up getting a job doing what we call closed captioning, which is subtitles on TV for deaf people. And I worked there for a long time. That was actually my main source of income for all these years. All the Klingon and stuff was on the side. When I first started the closed captioning, we could only do programs that were on film or on tape because we could get an advanced copy. Look at it, listen to the first line, hit pause, type in what we heard, hit go, hear the next line, hit pause, type in what we heard. And so it was more complicated than that, but that's basically the procedure. But we couldn't do anything live, like news or sports, where there was no tape, right? We finally developed a way to do that. And we decided that the first program we should tell everybody that we did it on the sly a little bit, didn't tell anyone, but all right, we're ready to announce it. We decided the first program should be one with high publicity value and relatively low probability of error in case it wasn't as good as we thought. So we picked the Oscars.
I love that. I'm sorry. It's just like, the little events, it's fine, the Oscar. Now that's my boy. But actually, I know in recent years you've had things happen left, right, and center. But for a long time, the Oscars was you could depend on it. Go out, make your speech, you make your thank yous, you sit back down again.
Exactly. And so, we picked it and the publicity value was obvious. And the low probability of error is what you were just saying. The show is no secret, it's scripted, except it's legit. It's legit. They don't know who's going to win. Okay. But everything other than, and the Oscar goes to so-and-so, and I'd like to thank my mother and father and acting coach and all that. Everything else is scripted or on tape or on film. So they said we could get the script ahead of time and we could put all that in. So what that meant is the whole show would be good for sure. And when the acceptance speeches came, if the new live captioning technology wasn't quite what we thought, at least the rest of the show would be terrific.
Sure.
Okay?
Sure.
Okay, so that was the plan. And they said, great, this is a good idea. We'll give you a script, but the script keeps changing. We'll give it to you, and then the next day there's changes, and the next day there's changes. And this goes on and on and on at an increasing rate the closer it gets to airtime. So someone needs to keep track to make sure you have the latest version. And I was given that job of keeping track of all this stuff. So I flew out to LA and called up the people I'm supposed to call. I guess I called the Academy. I can't remember who I called. And they said, basically, welcome to, this is a Monday morning, I remember. They said, welcome to LA. We'll have something for you Wednesday night or Thursday. So I had Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday with nothing to do, right?
Okay.
Which was fine with me. I grew up in Los Angeles, haven't lived there for a long time, but I grew up there. So family is there and friends and so on. But I hadn't called any of my friends ahead of time because, again, this is pre-cell phone or email and everything else, because I didn't want to say, hi, I'm in town and I have absolutely no time to see you, right? Because I thought I was going to be working all the time. But suddenly I did have time. So I got on the phone and I'm calling friends. And one friend said, where are you calling me from right now? I said where I was. She said, oh, so that's like a mile from here. Why don't you come by for lunch? Lovely. Okay. So I went to where she works to go out to lunch with her. And where she worked was Paramount Pictures. And her boss was Harv Bennett, who was at that time the executive producer of Star Trek II, which was in post-production. Then they were finishing things up. Filming was over. And I knew him too from a long time ago in another context. But I didn't go out to lunch with him. I went out to lunch with his, I guess her title was executive assistant or something. I don't know what anybody's title was. So she and I and another woman who was working on the film went out to lunch at the Paramount Commissary, right? Which sounds very elegant and wonderful, but there's two sides. I don't know if you've ever been.
I
There's two
haven't, no.
sides to the Paramount Commissary. One is a regular restaurant. It's a sit-down restaurant. That's where you see the movie stars, right? And the other one is a cafeteria, and that's where you see the gaffers and best boys and things like this, and the bit players. So anyway, that's where we were. And in the course of the lunch conversation, the fact that I had a degree in linguistics came up. And the woman who I had not met before said, oh, that's really interesting because we've been talking to the linguistics department at UCLA recently. And I said, why? That's odd. I've spent a lot of time in linguistics departments. The phones don't ring there very much. And she said, well, there's a scene in the movie in Star Trek II. I guess the secrecy things weren't quite as strict as this has become.
Now that you say that, yeah.
There's a scene in Star Trek II where Mr. Spock has a conversation with this Vulcan woman, a new character. And when they filmed the scene, the actors were speaking English because the script said, here's the lines. But now that we're in post-production and editing for a number of different reasons, which are very interesting, actually, you can come back to if you want, for a number of different reasons, everyone thinks they should be speaking Vulcan to each other rather than English. So we got the idea of getting a hold of a linguistics professor at UCLA to come and watch the scene, listen to what they said, look at their lips, and make up gobbledygook that when spoken matches the lips but sounds different. And then they would dub it in. And I said, that's really smart. That's very, very clever. And hiring a linguist to do it makes sense because they understand what you do with your tongue and lips and everything to make different sounds. So they know what looks like something else and what you cannot see at all and all that stuff. And she said, yeah, we thought it was a good idea too, but it's turned out to be a headache. And this is 40 something years ago. And I honestly and truly do not remember what the headache was about because it was a boring headache.
Okay.
Okay. Playing phone tag or again, no cell phones or email or anything. So it was just the scheduling was difficult or something. She said, I don't know what we're going to do. We have to have this taken care of right away. I said, what do you mean right away? She said, it's got to be done by the end of this week, which is exactly how long I was in town for the Oscars. And I said, I can do that. And my friend said, yeah, he can do that. He's got the same kind of degrees as those people at UCLA do. At that point, the associate producer walked by with his lunch. They turned to him and they said, we just solved the Vulcan problem. He said, what are you talking about? So they told him, he said, come see me after lunch. And that's how that happened. Now, the fact that I knew Harv Bennett is not irrelevant to the story because it was ultimately his decision to hire me. So he wasn't hiring someone off the street he never heard of or whatever.
Sure, yeah.
I didn't go there to get a job. I went there to get a sandwich.
That's the worst. You go in to get a sandwich and you walk out with new responsibilities.
Right.
That is, it does strike me as well as a very Hollywood story of the 20th century. It's that it's not a case of it's not what you know to, because obviously if you didn't know what you knew, there wouldn't be a job. And yet, as I say, as simple as a conversation in a canteen has led to you becoming the go-to name when it comes to languages in Star Trek.
Yeah. Yeah, very strange. Very strange. So I ended up, they showed me the scene from the film. And I wrote down what they were saying and looked at their lips and made up gibberish. And then the next day, had to go in to coach Savik. Right?
Of course, yeah.
Right, because this is a short little scene with Spock and Savik. It was a woman who I'd never heard of before, named Kirstie Alley. This is like her first job, her first big job in Hollywood. So she and I are working together on that. And right before we went over to do that, this associate producer says, in Star Trek, the motion picture, they speak Vulcan. I said, yeah. He says, your language should sound like that. Let's go look at it. I said, why did you tell me this now? I already made up these lines. We should have done this yesterday, but okay, let's see. Let's go look. Again, this is before videotapes. They videotapes technology already, but they weren't in mass distribution like later.
Sure.
So they showed me the scene. and I'm listening carefully to the Vulcan, because the second scene in Star Trek: The Motion Picture is Spock undergoing or trying or maybe undergoing the Kolinar thing. So I'm listening. I say, what am I hearing that you can't see on the lips that I can kind of sprinkle in there and not louse up what I've done? And what I heard was kinds of sounds, which are made back here. You can't see them. I said, good, let's put in a few of those. So we put in a few of those. Didn't louse up the lip movement. Working with Kirstie Alley, and I hear, and as we're rehearsing, sort of, I hear a conversation on the other side of the room between the associate producer and Nick Meyer, right, the director. And Nick says, I don't know if this Vulcan language is going to work. And the producer says, why? Why? Nick says, I don't think Vulcan should sound like Yiddish. And of course, what he was hearing was, which I just put in. Producer said, let's try it. Let's just try it. Okay. So we tried it, and we took a few takes because she had to match up the lips with and all that. And so when they played it back, of course, Leonard Nimoy wasn't there. So what it was is Saavik would say something in Vulcan and Spock would reply in English, and she would say something in Vulcan and Spock would reply. Anyway, everyone liked it. Oh, good. Great. We get to keep it. Friday of that week, I went back to do the same thing with Leonard Nimoy. Now I'm getting nervous. I didn't know Kirstie Alley, but I know who Leonard Nimoy is.
Yeah.
I got there on time. The engineer got there on time. Whoever brings the donuts got there on time. And and Leonard got there on time. So I'm in a room with me and Mr. Spock and donuts. And I figure, I know who he is. He doesn't know who I am. So I introduced myself. He says, oh, yeah, I knew you. They said you would be coming, show me what I've got to do. So we went through the lines, and he would say things like, okay, now if I change this to this, will that still work as far as lip movements are concerned? I said, yeah. He says, okay, let's change that. Because you could realize this is all gibberish. It doesn't mean anything.
Sure,
right?
yeah.
So to make a change, sure, go ahead. Here's about this line here. If I change this to this, will that louse up the lip movements? Yeah, okay, we'll leave that alone, right? So we did that. And at that point, I had Oscar work to do. So I left, and I'm driving to the Oscars, realizing that I had just taught Mr. Spock how to speak Vulcan. This is amazing. And I honestly and truly thought, what could be better than this, right? But this is the end of my career with movies and Star Trek and all that stuff. That's okay. That's okay. This is a good thing. And then about a year and a half later, Harv called and said, well, we've decided to make another movie. The villains are going to be the Klingons. He said, I think, meaning Harv thinks, that they ought to have their own language. You did Vulcan. You want to do Klingon? And that's how Klingon came about. So the idea of having a Klingon language at all was not mine. It was Harv's, or whoever wrote Star Trek: The Motion Picture, because it really started there.
That's what I was going to say. It's kind of because going back, there's the few words that were in that first scene of the motion picture as well, and how much, by the sounds of it, I'd say quite a bit. But I was going to say, how much did that scene influence then your work on Star Trek 3?
Oh, a lot. A lot, because that was the basis of the language. In the original series, right, there's not a word of Klingon spoken if you don't count people's names, right? We know there's such a thing as a Klingon language. That's what they called it, Klingonese, because in Trouble with Tribbles, right, just before the barroom brawl breaks out, right?
Yeah.
Guy says, I don't forget the exact quote, but the Enterprise is built like a garbage scow. Everybody knows that. That's why half the quadrant is learning to speak Klingonese, right? But he doesn't speak Klingonese. He only speaks English. Yeah. But anyway, we know there's such a language. In Star Trek: The Motion Picture, the opening scene is the 3 Klingon ships. And we see inside, I guess, the main one. And the captain, commander, whatever his rank is barking out commands in this new strange language with subtitles. That's the beginning of Klingon. Okay, that's the start. Those lines were sort of the result of the work of three people. Okay. The original Klingon lines were to be made up, were made up by a guy from UCLA, another guy from UCLA, named Harmut Scharf, I think. And his lines ended up not being used for some reason or other. And the line, but although they may have influenced what ended up in there, and the lines that did end up getting used were made up by one of the producers named John Poville and by James Doohan, right, who played Scotty. And they were spoken by Mark Leonard. So the lines were created by a Federation engineer and spoken by a Romulan. But anyway,
I mean, yeah.
So I listened to those lines. Wrote them down phonetically as best I could. Wrote down what the lines meant, not what the words meant, because I didn't know what the words meant. I only knew what the full line meant. I said, okay, these are the sounds. This is the basic syllable structure of the thing. You had to decide. There was one line in there as chayerush, like that. Is that one word or two words or three words? I don't know.
Yep.
You know, and if it's two words, is it one syllable then two, or two syllables then one? I don't know. So I just imposed a structure on it. Okay, chayerush, cha is one word, yerush is another word, just because you have to start somewhere, and then I built up from there. So so the basic sound of the language, not the grammar, but the basic sound of the language comes exactly from Star Trek: The Motion Picture. I added a bunch of sounds to it, but that was the start.
Then going into, I suppose this would be true of any project where you have to create a spoken language, but going into Star Trek 3, having that, was that great to have? And also, would you have preferred to just start from a blank slate?
It was great to have, because I had somewhere to begin, as opposed to just everything out. I mean, since then, with other languages, I would start with pretty much a blank slate. But for this first effort, it was really nice because the original Vulcan doesn't count. That was a different kind of creation, this lip syncing thing. Yeah, it was nice to have sort of an anchor point, a way to get into it and get going and build on, right? And plus, it had to match. Yep. This Klingon in that ship really said that stuff, so that counts.
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely. For example, yes, it's as you say, it's not a lip sync over later on. Right. Plus, of course, I would never dream of changing Mark Leonard's words. I
didn't know when I was working on Klingon at that time that Jimmy Doohan had done it or anything like that. And the way I found out was during the filming of Star Trek 3, right? All this work was done for Star Trek 3. This sounds silly, but it was absolutely true. One day I was hanging out on the Genesis planet, and so was Mark Leonard. I don't know why Mark was there, because he wasn't in any of those scenes, but he happened to be there.
He wasn't actually, was he? Yeah.
And the filming of the scenes on the Genesis planet, usually when you film a movie, you film all the scenes that take place in a certain location at the same time, regardless of where they come in the film, right? But for the Genesis planet, they had to film it in story order because the planet is falling apart. So after a successful, set of takes, they pause and destroy the planet a little bit. Then they do some more stuff, pause, and destroy the planet a little bit more. And they couldn't put it back together again.
Once it's done, it's done.
Right? So they had to do it in that order. So it took a long time to film those scenes because of that. So anyway, we're hanging around there, and I didn't know him, he didn't know me, but he looked over at me and he said, "Hi," he says, "I'm Mark." I said, "Hi, I'm Mark too." "Oh, good," And he basically said, not using these words, something along the lines of, "What are you doing here? What's your connection to the film?" So I told him. He says, "Oh, in Star Trek: The Motion Picture, I spoke Klingon lines." I said, "Yeah, I know." And he reached into his pocket and pulled out a sheet of paper. And on this paper were his Klingon lines written out. So and I recognized them from the film. And then there was a whole lot more. Okay.
Lines.
And he said, yeah, and John Poville and Jimmy Doohan made these up, and and here's what they are. But I'm looking and I'm thinking, what are all those other lines? Did I miss that in the film somehow? Is my language now going to be wrong?
Yeah.
Looking. So I went back. I went back to the motion picture to watch it again to see what I'd missed. And it turns out there is more Klingon than those few little introductory lines of him barking out commands. They're in a Federation, I don't know, listening post or something.
Yeah.
And they're monitoring these Klingon distress calls or whatever you want to call them. And there's Mark on the screen babbling away, but you can't hear him.
Oh, thank God.
Exactly. I was very relieved. I was very relieved. Although it came back to haunt me because years later, there was at the Smithsonian in Washington. It was the 20th or 25th or something anniversary of Star Trek, a 0 or a 5-year anniversary of Star Trek. So at the Smithsonian, there was a Star Trek exhibit that they'd mounted that was there for a bunch of months. And they realized ahead of time that this exhibit was probably going to be popular. So they enlisted a bunch of volunteer guides or docents or, people from the community to just keep tabs on crowds and things like that. When it was all over, they wanted to give a big thank you party.
Okay.
And they invited me to the party. I did just because they invited me to the party, and I knew ahead of time that this one of the guests was going to be Mark Leonard. And I also knew ahead of time that, and that was announced. Everybody knew that. I also knew ahead of time that one of the guests was going to be Majel Barrett, but that was a secret.
Oh, okay.
And the way it was supposed to work is they'd come out and the Smithsonian people would thank everybody and so on and so forth. And now here's Mark Leonard, and Mark would talk for a little while, and then he would say somehow, and now here's surprise, surprise, here's Majel Barrett. I happen to be sitting in the front row, and I'm watching this, and here's Mark, and he talks for a little while, and he's getting towards the end. And because I was in the front row, I could hear this kind of whispering behind the scenes a little bit. Someone said, "Where's Majel?
Oh, no.
Where's Majel?" Everyone knew she was in town. They'd seen her and talked with her, but she wasn't there. "Where's Majel?" And they said to Mark, "Keep going." And he tried to think of other things to say, so we talked a little while longer. He kind of looked around, "Keep going." And he's looking, trying to figure out what to do, and he spies me in the front row. He says, "Oh, look who's here." And he brings me up on stage, and he reaches into his pocket and pulls up this sheet of paper, and he says, "I'll say the line in Klingon, and you say what it means." Of course, there was all this gibberish Klingon that no one had ever heard. So, fortunately, about that point, Majel showed up.
Oh my goodness!
Saved the day. Yeah.
That feels like they conspired together. That's what that feels like. Right, we'll get him a seat in the front row. Yeah. That's. I thought. Now I'm just thinking, did Mark just always travel with that piece of paper in his pocket?
There's more stories about Mark and that piece of paper.
Really?
Yeah.
That is, because I'm sure there's maybe the fact that it's movie scripts, very meaningful. I totally respect. It's just the fact that these 2 times that he's talking to the inventor of the Klingon language, he was like, "Oh, look what I happen to have." One
of the other times there was a Star Trek cruise someplace. I wasn't on it, but one of the people who was on it is a guy named Lawrence Schoen, who is the head of what's called the Klingon Language Institute.
Okay.
People who study Klingon very, very seriously. And Lawrence was on the cruise, as was Mark Leonard. And they got to talking about something or other. Lawrence, besides being a linguist, is a psychologist, and they were talking about some stuff that Mark was interested in from that point of view and so on. And when it was over, Mark said, Lawrence told me this story. Mark said, "Oh, I'd like to thank you." He said, what can I do to thank you? He says, "How about if I give you this?" And he pulls out a piece of paper from his pocket, and here's the Klingon lines, and he gave them to Lawrence. So now Lawrence is in possession of these lines.
That is amazing. I mean, that's a piece of history, and it's got so much stories connected to it. and would be, of course, so meaningful to someone like Lawrence, who, you know, Klingon is his this huge point of study. That's incredible. Sorry, I love that Smithsonian story. That is brilliant. Did you ever find when things, and maybe I'm skipping ahead in the story slightly, but when things like the Klingon Language Institute like begin, and you know, it starts to be taken, because it is taken quite seriously. I mean, it's not, you know, in the same way that, for example, Tolkien scholars study, you know, Elvish and Dwarvish. Were you ever a bit overwhelmed, or did it come in such stages that it was, that's okay? There's entire line. I mean, like, yes, it's studying Klingon, but they're studying my work.
Overwhelm is a good word. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and I had no idea what was going on at first.
Okay.
When we were working on Star Trek 3, I mean, I was on the set on Star Trek 3 every time anybody speaks Klingon, almost, not 100% of the time, but most of the time. Most of the time when you see someone speaking Klingon, I'm just out of the frame, right? But not always. But anyway, I was there for a month or something while we were doing all this. And during that time, the crew would come up to me, meaning the filmmaking crew, would come up to me and say, "Oh, you're the language guy. Yeah, say something in Klingon." I'd say, "What should I say?" They'd say, "Hello, how are you?" I'd say, "Klingon would never say that." Ha ha ha, and so on. Anyway, I realized that, or kind of got the idea that if the crew, the filmmaking crew, and they've seen everything, they've been around for so long, all of them, right? And nothing phases them. But if they're interested in this, there are people out there who at the time I only had a vague familiarity with, called Star Trek fans. They might be interested. So I proposed the idea of writing a book explaining how this language works. And a lot of stuff happened. And then the powers that be said, yes, you know, do that. So I did. And when you write a book, you hope that people will buy it.
Of course, yeah.
And what I honestly thought would happen with this book is, again, I hope people would buy it, and then they would pick it up and kind of thumb through it and say, "Oh, look, here's the Klingon word for shoe, ha ha," and put it down on the table. And then from time to time, pick it up again. If I wonder how you say dilithium, you know, or whatever. But it would be used in that way. And I was right about people buying it. I mean, it wasn't in huge numbers, but good enough at the time. It was the very beginning. I was wrong about how people were going to use it, because they did read it and reread it and analyze it, right? Yeah. And then you can find on the web a list of all the typos and all this stuff. And this whole language speaking community, Klingon speaking community developed. I didn't know that was going on. Okay, until I got a call or an email or something or other from this Lawrence Schoen person, who said he's the head of something called the Klingon Language Institute. And I said, "What's that?" "Oh, yeah, we study Klingon and we do this, and we have a journal and we have meetings and so on." As the first time I'd heard or realized that people were paying attention to it, you know, which was kind of a surprise. Now, in retrospect, maybe I shouldn't have been surprised, because, you know, it's Star Trek. But I was at that point.
Well, I think so, because I think, yes, now we as Trekkies, we are known for being passionate. You know, we are known for, you know, when we commit 150%. One only needs to look at my wardrobe and the amount of uniforms I have to know that, you know, kind of, oh, Sean took this when I went running. But even at the time, you know, it's not like the internet was there to share all of these ideas. And, you know, the conventions, I think, were more or less still, they were maybe not their infancy, but they were pre-adolescence at this point.
Yeah, the book originally was supposed to come out exactly the same time as Star Trek 3 came out. And there was a delay in publication for bureaucratic reasons. Not bad, just things.
Just things happened. Yeah,
things happen. Okay, so it came out, I don't know, 6 months later or something like that. But anyway, that was, I guess, 1984, 85, something 485, like that.
Yeah.
The book was reissued in the early 90s, 91 or 92, with additional material from Star Trek 5 and 6 and Next Gen.
Gotcha.
At that point, the internet was up and running.
Here we go.
I mean, it was up and running before, but more and more people
Yeah.
had it. And so I honestly believe that one of the reasons that Klingon caught on the way it did in terms of speaker community is because of the internet.
Yeah.
People were able to find each other in a way that they couldn't have before the internet. You might have been interested by yourself and maybe your friend across the street, but that's it. You had no easy way of finding other people on an ongoing basis. But with the internet, you could, and that's exactly what happened. And then once the Klingon Language Institute got going, that was all, finding people. People found each other on the internet and stuff originally, and then it grew from there.
And things like the Klingon Shakespeare performances, which I mean, obviously they must be somewhat inspired by Undiscovered Country.
100% inspired by Undiscovered Country. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. One of my favorite lines is, "You haven't experienced Klingon, or you haven't experienced Shakespeare till you've read him in the original Klingon."
Yeah, there's a whole story about that too. But what happened with that is in the script for Star Trek 6, first draft, there was a lot of Shakespeare quotes. Some were to be in English, some were to be in Klingon. I think probably all spoken by Chang, but there was a bunch. And as script revisions kept coming out, some of them went away. That's not bad. That's what you.
Yeah, just
things change all over the place. And eventually, there was zero Shakespeare in Klingon left in the script. There was still Shakespeare lines that he would cite,
but none of them was
not in Klingon. They were all in English. I'd already made up a way to say petard in Klingon because. But it got cut out. Anyway, I arrived at the set one day. The first person I happened to run into was Nick Meyer. Yet again, Nick Meyer.
Yeah.
And he said, "Oh, I'm glad you're here. I need one more line in Klingon." I said, "Okay. What is it?" He said, "To be or not to be."
I knew it was going to be that one.
And I said, "Okay," because that's what I'm supposed to say.
Of course. Yeah.
And I thought, oh no. Because if you look in the Klingon dictionary and read the grammatical description,
oh god,
Klingon, there's no verb to be. It doesn't exist.
Oh god.
And I was not about to change that for two reasons. One, because there's a good reason in my mind that it's not there. And two, it says in the book that it's not there.
There's not one there.
There's nothing you can do. I said, all right. What if it, instead of saying to be or not to be, it means to live or not to live? Nick says, that's fine. Go tell Chris. Well, Chris is Christopher Plummer, right? So I go over to Christopher Plummer. So the way to say live or not to live, there's probably a whole bunch of different ways grammatically I could have done it, but I did it very, very simply, which is live or live not. Had to use the dictionary. When I did Star Trek 3, I could make stuff up as I'm going along.
Yeah.
But by the time the book came out, I'm stuck with the book. I could make up stuff that's not in the book, but if it is in the book, I had to go by the book. Okay. So in the book, the word for live is yin, or is par, then live again, and not is, or the negative thing is bet. Yin par, yin bet, live or live not. Let's go to Christopher Plummer. He says, how do you say the line? I said, yin par, yin bet. And he goes, yin? I said, yeah. He goes, that's too wimpy. Think of something else. That's not what he said. I'll tell you what he really said if you want, but that's what he meant.
You could tell me what he really said. That's fine.
Okay. I'll tell you that in a second. So I'm thinking now, what am I going to do if I can't say yin and have it mean the right thing? I said, what if we say tach pach, tach bet? And he goes, tach is good. Let's keep tach. So, okay. Up until that moment, tach was a suffix that meant to continue doing whatever the verb is. So walk plus tach means continue walking, keep on walking. So I kind of promoted it to be a full verb, sort of. Right. To mean to continue, to go on, to endure. So tach, pach, tach, bet, to go on or not to go on, to continue or not to continue, to endure or not to endure. And that was the line in the film. Now, I didn't know where it fit in the film at that point, because it wasn't supposed to be in Klingon originally, so I didn't even look at that page.
Mm.
You know, but it ended up in the scene that you just talked about, where Gorkon, the leader of the Klingon Empire, says, "I'd like to propose a toast, to the undiscovered country," and everyone has a blank blank expression. And Spock says, "Hamlet, Act 3, Scene 1." I don't know if the numbers are right, because it's part of that phrase, "undiscovered country," is part of the to be or not to be speech. Gorkon says, "You can't really appreciate Shakespeare until you've read him in the original Klingon." Christopher Plummer says, "Tach, pach, tach," and that's how it feels. What he said when he didn't like Ian was there. What he said was, Yin, he says, "That sounds too much like the Goon Show." Do you know what the Goon Show is?
I don't.
That's what I said. The Goon Show was a BBC radio show in the 50s, maybe early 60s. Comedy show, predates Monty Python, probably gave birth to Monty Python in many ways.
Okay.
Very funny, very strange and silly and out there. They had one popular song in the 50s, a hit, called the Ying Tong song, I think. And the lyrics to the song were "Ying Tong, Idle Po, Ying Tong, Idle Po, Ying Tong. That was the lyrics.
Okay.
And that's what he was hearing.
And then once you hear that, I think it would be okay, right, that's it forever. We're definitely going with something else. So
yes,
yeah.
Exactly.
Just going back just a tiny little bit, what was the reason that they decided to do the Vulcan lip sync over? You said that there was production reasons behind that.
Yeah. Okay. The reason that they did is because they cut what they told. Part of this is they told me, and part of this I figured it out.
Gotcha.
What they told me is they cut some lines out from that scene that had to do with the relationship of Spock and Saavik on the one hand, and the rest of the crew or the rest of the Federation maybe on the other hand.
Okay.
And they wanted to, and what the lines say basically, because they're in the original script, is Spock is telling Saavik, and Saavik's the new kid on the block, right? Spock is telling her that they're always going to be outsiders. We're always going to be different. You just have to learn how to tolerate that, basically. But that's not going to change. You have to learn how to incorporate that into how we deal with everything. That got cut out.
Okay.
But they wanted to introduce the fact that these two characters are somehow a little different, a little outside of everything else, and have a special bond together. And they thought doing that in this linguistic way would be a way to kind of signal that, since they cut out the thing. That's one reason. The other reason is they changed one of the lines.
Okay.
All they changed was the tense. Okay. The original, the scene is that Kirk comes aboard the Enterprise to do an inspection. He's Admiral Kirk, right? Comes aboard the ship to do an inspection. And he has a short little conversation with Spock and Saavik, and then he goes off to continue the inspection. And Saavik turns to Spock as originally scripted, and she says, "He's not what I expected." And Spock says, "What did you expect?" I'm paraphrasing. She says, "Well, he's so human." And Spock says, "We can't all be perfect," something like that. The line in the script was, "He's not what I expected," which implies that she's never met him before. She's heard about him, but she's never met him before.
But
we know,
yes,
in the Kobayashi Maru. My theory is that the scene with the Kobayashi Maru either was not in the film originally or was somewhere else in the film. Okay.
I remember hearing somewhere along that, and this could be apocryphal, but I remember hearing so it was to do with the leak of the big ending. That this scene was then sort of We're kind of, well, oh, you've all heard this is going to happen, but I bet you're not expecting it first thing, are you?
Exactly. And I've heard the same thing. So they put it in, and therefore her saying he's not what I expected makes no sense. So the subtitle says he's never what I expect.
Hmm.
Okay. And so
It's
now
the
it makes
subtlest
sense. And
change.
they could still keep the rest of it. It's subtle change, but it now makes more sense. Actually, with talking about the leak, I'd heard about the leak too. I mean, when I was out there, for the Oscars, I mean, I knew what's going on with Star Trek, meaning I knew what the scuttlebutt was, not from any inside information, but just the same as everybody else.
Sure.
So I had friends who were working on the film, but I had no insight at all into anything. But I'd heard about this thing, Spock dies. Really? No, all that. So when we went in to do the looping, the dubbing with Leonard Nimoy to do this Vulcan lines, they said to me, we want to do one other scene with him first, and then we'll get to the Vulcan. Is that okay? Can you wait while we do that? Sure. So I'm just sitting there while they do it. And what this scene was, I had no idea what the plot of the movie is at all. Even the scene I made up the lines for, I don't know what's going on. And what it was, we're on the bridge of what looks like the Enterprise or some similar ship. And Saavik is in command. And Spock is there, and Bones is there. And there's an attack, and the Klingons are coming and do this, do that, and the other thing, right? And the Klingons attack. And Spock gets hit, right? And he falls back and apparently dies. And I'm watching this. I'm going, it's true. It's true. The rumors are true. I'm seeing this. Wow. I know something that nobody else knows, right? So when I actually saw the movie, when the movie came out, I didn't go to a preview or anything. I saw it in the theater like everybody else. And it turns out to be the Kobayashi Maru thing. Oh my! I think I was thrown for a loop more than most people were.
That's because I can just imagine. I can imagine if you were there with someone or even people who are around you in the cinema, just everyone will react when the console explodes and Spock falls down. But they're like, why is he reacting before any of this has happened? Why are you going? What? I know what you've done here. Oh, that's gas. And obviously, I mean, you're still the Kelpian language.
Yeah.
So I have to full disclosure now. That was something I discovered in my research today. So that is fantastic. I mean, so you're there. You're both legacy and I suppose I tend to use modern, maybe streaming era is a better description. Have you found, has there been, what's it like behind the scenes for you? Is it very different, or is it very similar to how it was?
Oh, it's different. It's different in two ways. One is, and this is probably more because of COVID than anything
of course,
else.
yeah.
Everything is remote control. All the stuff I've done after the movies has been sitting at home and being on Skype or something or other. Okay, so so even with Kelpian, I mean, one day I was working with Doug Jones. Doug Jones is on my screen, and I'm listening to the director, and I'm in one city and he's in another city. The director's in another city, and the sound recorder is in another city. I don't know how it all works. It all does. It all comes together. So it's a very different thing. So I haven't worked one-on-one with anybody since the original cast movies.
It is. It's fast, and as you say, I mean, I'd say COVID has played.
In person, yeah.
Of course, yeah. I think if it sounds weird to say the good thing about COVID, because no, thank you, but it has helped us all, I think, work more remotely, and that remote work has become more streamlined, that it works a little bit better.
Yeah.
I mean, and obviously, the proof was in the pudding. We were able to watch these people speaking Kelpie, and we're like, yeah, that works for me. I buy it. If I'm going to buy Klingon, this works for me.
Yeah. The other thing that's happened that's different from when I was doing it originally is now, well, ever since Klingon, meaning from Star Trek 3 times and maybe Star Trek 5 and 6 times already. Yeah, from all that. Ever since that, and not because Klingon is so wonderful as a language, not because it has nifty relative clauses or something or other. But I think because it's Klingons and Star Trek, Klingons as
Hmm.
characters and Star Trek. Ever since then, movie makers, TV program makers, if there's an alien race or a mythological ancient human race or something or other, they've got to have their own language. And that wasn't true before. Before they go, everyone's running around and everybody is speaking English. Everywhere, if it's an English language thing, everyone is speaking English all over the place. You just kind of accept that. But now you can't, or there's a little bit of gobbledygook. But you can't do that anymore. Now it's real languages all over the place. So there are, a friend of mine, David Peterson in Hollywood, who's made up the languages for Game of Thrones and a bunch of other things. His full-time job basically is making up languages for TV and movies. And there's a handful of people who do this, including for Klingon now. So in Discovery, which has more Klingon than anything, the first season of Discovery, especially the opening scene in Discovery, brand new Star Trek TV show, is 10 minutes or something of Klingon, right? I didn't do that. It's all my words. It's all my grammar. But somebody else did the translation. It's is a woman named Robin Stewart who lives in Canada. She's an excellent speaker of Klingon, and she did that. And for some episodes where she wasn't available, this guy in Indiana named Alan Anderson, he did it, and he's another excellent speaker, and so on. So different people are doing it, and they've got a stable of, I don't know, 4 or 5 people to make up languages. I'm one of a number now of people doing it, because this whole idea of language construction in the movies caught on after Klingon. In fact, when the next big one after Klingon was Na'vi in Avatar.
Oh, yes, of course. And when you think of it, there's quite a gap. I mean, that's what, nearly 20-something years, because I think Avatar Na'vi is 2009?
2009, right. Because 2009 was the first J.J. Abrams Star Trek, and Avatar about the same time. And I worked on that movie, J.J. Abrams movie, but not Klingon. That was Romulan and Vulcan.
Because I was going to say, you're the big three. You've got Vulcan, Klingon, and Romulan all on your
we'll come back to Romulan too. But anyway, at the time before Avatar came out, but everyone knew it was coming, right? It was advertised and everything already. J.J. Abrams said that Avatar has this new language in it that's going to out Klingon, he said. I don't know what that means exactly. But and it's a terrific language. Na'vi is wonderful as a language. It sounds good, and it's grammatically very interesting and all that stuff. But it was the beginning of this thing about, no, you got to have a real language. You got to have a real language. You got to do it right.
And it's I imagine that could legitimately now be quite daunting for any potential filmmaker, showrunner who wants to go into, say, sci-fi or fantasy, and you need to put time aside. It's like, okay, well, we're not just going to have them spouting, things that sound good in the moment, because people will be analyzing this. People will be going, oh, you're the one show that didn't make the...
A good example of that, although it's Klingon again, is Star Trek, J.J. Abrams, Star Trek Into Darkness, the middle movie, which is the only one that has Klingon in it. The first movie had Klingon in it, but the scene got cut out early.
Yes, of course, yeah.
The middle movie has Klingons in it, but also one scene of speaking Klingon. It used to have more, of course, because that's movies do that. So I made up a bunch of lines of Klingon for the original script. Sent them off. I was not on set for that. There was another guy who they hired, who I know, who coached the actors, and they did a fine job, as far as I know. Then months go by, because this is the way movie making works. Months go by, and I get a call or an email or something from the Into Darkness folks, and they say they've edited the scene where they speak Klingon so much that it doesn't make sense anymore. In other words, they move things or switch things around, cut a line halfway through, and spliced it together with the beginning of yet another line, and so on. So it all looks different, and what the language this there does is all nonsense. So they realized they were doing this and said, all right, we have three options. One is we shoot the scene all over again and have it be right. It was Uhura mostly, Zoe Saldana is mostly her. And have her come in and do it again. That's not going to happen. Or we can forget about it and just let it go and have the beginning of one line match with the end of another line. Once upon a time, maybe you could get away with that, but not anymore. And they realized that. Or we can see if I can create new Klingon lines that match the lip movements of the Klingon already filmed and mean what the new subtitles say. So they asked me if I could do that. And I said, I don't know. And the trick here is, unlike that Vulcan, originally the Vulcan, it didn't have to match anything vocabulary-wise or grammar-wise. And for the Klingon, I can make up new words, but I can't make up new grammar. So that was the tricky part. So they said, well, let us send you the scene, look at it, and tell us what you think. So they sent me the thing in some super encrypted way. I don't know how this through all the levels of security, but I got it. And I watched it, and it's mostly Uhura talking. And I'm listening to her, and I remember I made up that line. Oh, that's from another sentence I made up for her. Oh, that came later, and stuff like that. But I see what they did. But I think I can cope with that. Okay. And then there's a Klingon guy who has basically one line. And I'm listening to him, and I'm saying, I don't understand a word he's saying. I understood her, even though it was kind of all jumbled up. I didn't understand him at all. And I'm listening, and I said, Zoe did such a wonderful job as the same coach. Why did this guy do such a bad job? I said, it doesn't even sound like he's talking Klingon. It sounds like he's talking backwards. Oh. So I looked at the lines that I'd made up, and I said, I think it's this one. And I wrote it out backwards and then listened to him. And that's exactly what it was. So I called up the movie folks, and I said, are you running the film backwards? It's not film. Are you running this backwards? And they said, yeah. And I said, why? They said, it looks better, and we knew we were going to change the audio anyway. So what I had to do is make up Klingon that meant what the subtitles said, that matched the lips of some guy talking Klingon backwards.
Oh my God. You'd think that they might have told you that in advance. If there was one thing, they might have said, oh, this one might stand out.
But the point of the story is not so much that, although I think that's a unique thing in movie making. Yeah. But the point is that they said, no, we can't just let it go. We have to get it right, and that's a change from when I started doing all this.
That is, I mean, as a fan, as a Trekkie, I'm delighted to know that amount of detail and care went in, that even when editing is happening, no, this has got to make sense, and we're very aware of the fact people will analyze that. I'm sure there is a moment somewhere where someone just thinks, oh, just put anything on it, these poor people. Let Mark sleep. Yeah.
For Next Generation Deep Space Nine, the Klingon in there, I did a couple of episodes. But mostly the Klingon that's in there that's new was made up by the writers or the producer or somebody or other. But if it's there, if Worf says it in Next Generation Deep Space Nine, that counts. So I would incorporate that, but I didn't come up with that originally.
And is, like, obviously, so you're, as I say, you've created these numerous languages, but Klingon definitely seems to be that's the big one that you're known for. Yeah. 5 novels to date. I think that's correct. So 5 books, including the dictionary. 3
books. 3 books.
3 books.
2 audio tapes or whatever format they're in now. Yeah.
Gotcha. Do you ever just get tired of it? Do you just like, oh, can everyone just speak English? Would it not just be easier? Or conversely, it's like, oh, I've made a perfectly good Romulan one. Why aren't you speaking that one?
Yeah. No, I don't get tired of it at all. I think it's great. I get a little we used the word overwhelmed a little earlier. Some of this with some of the questions, because the speakers of the language are some of them are so into it and want to make sure they're doing it exactly right. And they ask me questions that I don't have off the top of my head answers to. And I say, I have to think about that, and so on. And that's because of the nature of Klingon. It's different for Klingon. I think it is probably for Na'vi, for Avatar, and for some other languages, for some other shows. Because when I originally did Klingon, I didn't know any of this was going to happen. I mean, I didn't know that people were going to pick it up and speak it and write novels and do operas and all these things. And so what I created originally for Star Trek 3 is I had the script of Star Trek 3, and I had my idea about what to do grammatically and phonologically. And I made up the Klingon version of every line in the script where it said so-and-so is speaking Klingon. And I also made up a Klingon version of every line in the script where a Klingon was speaking English to another Klingon, not to Captain Kirk. Just in case while we were filming, someone say, hey, why is this guy talking English to this other Klingon? He should be talking Klingon. I could say, here, say this, right? They use 0 of those lines, but it did flesh out the language, but I didn't make up anything else. I didn't make up anything that wasn't needed for that script originally. Okay. So there's lots of holes grammatically and vocabulary wise, for sure, and so on. Now it all over time developed and there was more and more and more, but I didn't set out at the very beginning to make everything. And I liken it to making a set for a movie. Okay, for a movie set, let's say it's a house. Okay, and the action takes place in somebody's living room, and there's a window with the curtains on it, and there's a door, and there's a whatever there is, and all that's fine. If in the plot of the movie, no one ever has to go in and out of the door, that door doesn't open. Why are they going to bother to make the door open? That doesn't mean they don't know how doors work, right? They just made it look right, right?
Yeah.
And it was the same thing with the language. Okay, I just made up what was needed. If no one needed to say second person plural, I didn't make it up. That doesn't mean there's no such thing. Just didn't make it up. It wasn't needed. That's not the right way to make up a language.
In theory, no, you're right. Get all the, get your grammar correct and then build everything from there. But I mean, by the sense, but at the time, someone's like, translate those words. It wasn't about creating a language. It's about creating a usable script for the film. Right.
It was creating a usable script, and the language was supposed to, I mean, Harv Ben and I talked about it. It was supposed to sound real, and we realized that we'd make it sound real was to make it be real, but that didn't mean to make it be the OED,
That's was there anyone who particularly struggled with it? Because there's no point of comparison at this point. There's no, except for those few lines in the motion picture. And it's a lot. People like, did Christopher Lloyd ever get tongue tied over his Klingon teeth? Trying to pronounce these things.
Actually, that's very funny. The first time I met Christopher Lloyd was at his house. I arrived in Hollywood to work for the filming part of this. And the moment I arrived at Paramount, they said, oh, good, go over and meet Chris. Who's Chris? Well, he's the guy who's going to play Krug. Okay, I don't know who Chris is. So they gave me he lived at the time not very far from Paramount. So I went over to his house and met this guy. And we go up, he had a room above his garage. And we go and sit up there. And so far, he hasn't said much to me besides, I mean, it was very nice. Hello, that kind of stuff. But But he sat down, he had the script, and he had the lines that I'd sent. And he kind of looked at the lines, looked at me and looked at the lines. And he said, Yehoch, or something. He said, how's that? Does that sound like good Klingon? And I'd say, yeah, that was good. Do this. So we did this for a while. And then all of a sudden he said, oh my God, I should go put in my teeth. And he went away. And I'm thinking, oh, I didn't even notice this poor man doesn't have any teeth.
Oh my God.
Of course he has teeth. I didn't realize he meant the appliance for the makeup. He says, if I'm going to learn how to say this stuff, I need to be able to say it with this stuff in my mouth, right? Then he put it in, then we practiced. We practiced some more. No, he really got into it. He wanted to learn it not just phonetically. He wanted to know what the words meant and how the grammar worked and things like that. And he knew while we were filming if things were going right or going wrong or something like that. Because the way it worked for Star Trek 3 is, when you make a movie, the director yells action, and the actors do their thing, and then the director yells cut. And then the director checks with the camera person. Was that okay? Yeah. No, there was a shadow of a microphone. Okay. Checks with the sound person. Was that okay? Yeah. No, a truck went by.
No.
And if there was Klingon, he would check with me. How was the Klingon? And if the Klingon was good, I'd say that was good. And if the Klingon wasn't good, I'd say, nah, he said it wrong. I learned not to give that second answer very often.
Okay.
Because they did not like the idea of shooting things over again if they didn't have to, right? So if the actor said something that sounded like Klingon but said it wrong, but it sounded like Klingon, I'd say that's fine. So for example, if the actor was supposed to say toe, but he said two, I'd say it's fine. From now on, the word is two. And
okay.
Changed it. So the language changed as a result of little mistakes. I could do that with Star Trek 3 because no one had heard the language except for me. Right? Later on, I couldn't do that so much. But at the time, they took it very, very seriously. There's one scene where Krug Krug gives a command to one of his gunners. There's another ship out there, and he wants the gunner to shoot at the ship, not destroy it. Just and the command is target the engine only.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And the way to say that in Klingon is I think the line was means gunner, dosh, the target. It's very choppy when you're giving commands. Gunner, target. Jontat means engine. Nech means only. Gunner, the target is just the engine. Okay. So when they shot that scene, Christopher Lloyd says, like that. And the director, Leonard Nimoy, is the director, right? Yells, cut. You're supposed to be talking Klingon, not French. Do it again, right? So they took it seriously. Then he did it again, and he said it properly. Of course, the gunner goofs and blows up the ship, and Krug is angry, and he shoots the guy, and the guy dissolves, right? And Krug has two helpers, right? Two high officers named Maltz and Torg. And Torg at that point, Krug is angry. And Torg says to him, "My lord." They always called Krug "my lord" in that movie.
Yes.
Yeah. He says, "My lord." And Krug is still furious. And he swivels around. And he points the weapon, whatever it was, disruptor, I don't know, whatever it was, points it at Torg. And in the script, what he says is, "Say the wrong thing, Torg, or I'll kill you too." And then Torg has some news for him. Okay. They cut out the phrase, "or I'll kill you too." That's not in the movie anymore. But the "say the wrong thing, Torg" is there. So, okay. Right before shooting that scene, Christopher Lloyd calls me over. And he said, "How do you say Torg in Klingon?" I didn't make up any of the names, any of the character names.
That's a good point.
But I'd thought about it, right? I said, okay, Krug is not Krug, it's Krug.
Okay.
Maltz is Mat. And Torg, I told him, is Dorg, like that. He says, okay. So we shoot the scene. The guy dissolves. Torg says, "My lord." He swings around and says, "Say the wrong thing, Dorg, or I'll kill you too." Nimoy yells, "Cut." "Why are you calling my Klingon a dork?" Christopher Lloyd says, "Mark told me to." Leonard says, Mark, what's the matter with Torg? I said, nothing, nothing. Torg is just fine. So they shot the scene again. Say the wrong thing, Torg, or I'll kill you too. Okay. When it's all over, Christopher Lloyd comes up to me. He says, oh, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I got you in trouble with the director. I said, no, it's fine. Everything is okay. He says, but did you notice I didn't say Torg? I said Torg. I said it in Klingon.
I love that.
Yeah.
I love that. I mean, and it's a sign as well of just how much they've obviously respected your work.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? And obviously how much Christopher Lloyd was having fun on the set as well. Oh, that is cool.
Yeah.
In terms then of just how, I mean, you've spoken as well about how Klingon has been used on Discovery. Have you ever, in some of these, I know there's been performances entirely in Klingon, particularly obviously we spoke of Shakespeare. I mean, there is a version of the RSC which is being done in Klingon. I know there was clips of Hamlet, I think, being performed in Klingon.
Yeah, to the best of my knowledge, there hasn't been there's been full translations.
Sure.
Of some Shakespeare. Because of that line, you can't really appreciate Shakespeare until you've read them in the original Klingon. The members of the Klingon Language Institute have said, well, if these Shakespeare plays were originally written in Klingon, we owe it to the galaxy not to translate, but to restore the works of Shakespeare back to the original Klingon.
Rightly so.
So they've done Hamlet, they've done Much Ado About Nothing. I think they might have finished Romeo and Juliet by now. They've done some sonnets, they've done some speeches from some other shows. But as far as I know, there's never been a full performance of the entire play of any of these things in Klingon, but there have been performances of scenes. Yeah.
Either from the movies or from, say, some of these Shakespeare ones, do you have a favorite phrase in Klingon?
I wouldn't say a favorite phrase. Well, I guess to be or not to be might be a favorite phrase because of how it came to be. I have a favorite word, which is cheating.
Okay.
That's not a phrase. When I was working on the film, when I was at Star Trek 3, because the first one, I was wondering all the time if there's going to be one word or one phrase that people are going to recognize as Klingon, even if they don't know anything else about the language or anything else, maybe even about Star Trek. And there is. Okay. And that word is kapla, right? And that's the word that people know. So that's my favorite word. Yeah.
I love that, and you're right. I mean, I've spoken to people who are not Trekkies. There's two people I've met in my life who are not Trekkies, but no, and everyone knows Kapla. They might not know from the context or whatever, but it is one of those words that has just kind of permeated popular culture.
And if you look, online in the Urban Dictionary, dictionaries of slang and stuff like that, it's in there. It's spelled Kapla or some strange way, but anyway, it's there. Yeah.
Does it ever kind of make your eye kind of twitch when you see someone butchering a word or spelling Kapla with a K?
Yeah. Yeah, you don't know what you're doing. Yeah.
I think that's fair. You put enough work into creating the thing. I think you're allowed to be a bit like, just get it right. Mark, thank you so. You've been so generous with your time. I'm gonna come up to the end now, and I've got a question to ask you now in a moment. But just again, I just want to say thank you so much. This has been amazing.
Good. Thank you. This has been fun. Yeah.
It's been really, you're the literal father of the Klingon language, which is fantastic. Especially because one day I'll become a Klingon. It's been my dream the whole time. I'm still working on the dictionary, so
good.
Here's a nice, easy question for you. In Klingon, what does Star Trek mean to you? No, what does Star Trek mean to you, Mark?
In general. Well, there's sort of two ways of looking at it. What it means to me on a very personal level, which is probably not as interesting as a more general level, is that it's absolutely changed my life. There's no question about it. And I realized a while back, and it's been a long time. It's been 40 years or more since I started doing all that. most of the people who I've met and become close with after I started doing that is only because of Star Trek, and they're all over the world, right? And that wouldn't have happened without Star Trek. So there's that, for sure. And some people have become, very, very close friends. More generally, it's the thing everyone says. Star Trek is still something to give us hope. I don't want to be trite, but hope about the future. Right now, if you look at what's going on in the world, it's not something to be really optimistic about. Things are going in the wrong direction. It's not without recourse. There's things that people can do. Things can change. People can take care of stuff if they try. But come on, do it. And it doesn't seem to be happening, or at least not happening at a quick enough rate. And it's could be cataclysmic. It's not just people angry at each other. It's the whole world. It's the ice is melting. And all this stuff. But we look at Star Trek, and they're in the 23rd, 24th, 30-something century. We're okay. There's problems, there's issues, and all that, but we're okay. And things will go on. And I think that's a good sign. That's something that's something to hold on to.
I love that. Optimism. I love that. Mark, thank you so much. You are just this wealth of I've loved your stories, particularly the one where Majel Barrett and Mark Leonard stitched you up at the Smithsonian. It has been an absolute treat. If people listening to this want to reach out and get in touch with you online, what's the best place to find you?
You can't. It's very difficult. If they want to send stuff to you and you want to forward to me, that's fine.
Perfect. That's it. Then that's exactly what I will do.
Okay.
Everyone, thank you so much for listening along and for watching. You have been wonderful as always. We will be back next week with an episode of The War Room. I have been Sean. I have been joined by the wonderful Dr. Marc Okrand. And to everyone out there, live long and prosper. And could I get a cheeky kapla?
Kapla!
Brilliant.
Okay. Bye-bye.